Hey guys, welcome back to another Dad Mods Tech video. So today we're going to be showing you how we're setting up our Tanks Incorporated poly fuel tank for the 1950 Ford. So what we have is a poly reproduction version of the fuel tank. This differs from the factory steel tanks in that it's a kind of plastic, and it has, it's a freshly engineered one, so that means that it has modern features to it. It has a recess for a drop-in fuel injection pump. It has a recess for where your wires and your fuel line would be running. It has a baffle built into it. It has modern venting, and it even has brand new filler pieces that come along with it. So the filler side that goes onto the tank, the filler tube, and then you can use basically any sensors as well. So that's nice because it uses a standard 5-bolt level sender. So what we're doing is we're making this work with all the factory shoebox gauges. So we've got a fuel level sender that is compatible with the factory gauges. What we're going to focus on right now, though, to kick this off, is how to go about installing a fuel injection pump into one of these tanks. Setting this up for carb is very simple. Just follow the directions that they have. There's no real drilling involved in doing the carb setup on it. Fuel injection, on the other hand, there's a little bit more involved, and you actually have to drill holes. So I'll show you how we're going to do that. And we're going to start things off by just talking about the tools that you need to complete this. So what we're going to need is a 4.5-inch hole saw. You're going to need a 1/4-inch drill bit. You're going to need a 1/4-inch socket, and bear with me, what is this one again? A 5/16 socket. You're going to need a fuel-safe gasket sealant, not a silicone like RTV. You're going to want to make sure that you use a specifically fuel-safe one. You're going to need thread tape, and then you're going to need a screwdriver or two. So, first things first. What we start off by doing is removing the vent that's on the top of the gas tank so that you can start drilling it out with a hole saw. And step number 2 is to drill your hole. So grab your 4.5-inch hole saw, set it up in your drill. They pilot the center of this thing for you, so there's a little dimple directly in the center. That's really nice because you're not having to spend a bunch of time marking and making sure you try and get this in the center of it. So go ahead and set up your drill and get started. Hold it as straight up and down as possible. The next step is to clean this thing out. While I'm in here, I'm going to use a razor blade to kind of clean up these edges. Give it a little chamfer. Okay guys, okay, so now we need to drill 8 holes into the top of this because we have the style of gas tank that already has the threaded inserts in it. What you need is 8 more holes. So this trim ring is what goes inside of the tank and is pressed up against the bottom side and threaded into, and that's what helps clamp all of the layers together. So that doesn't work for marking the holes, but what you can do is you can take the pump assembly, flip it upside down, and you can set it in here so that all of your threaded inserts line up correctly. I'm actually going to thread fasteners into these to ensure that it's in the right spot. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to mark these holes. Use enough of these so that you can guarantee that you're centered on these holes, because you want to get this right the first time. They have you drill 1/4-inch holes, which does give you a buffer in case your holes aren't perfect. But your goal should still be to get it perfect. Now I'm not going to snug these down all the way because they have a little gasket on the top of them, and I don't want to cause any wear and tear to those little seals. With any remaining open holes, you can use that as a visual to see how well you've lined everything up. And it looks like in all of the holes that I have here that are showing, it looks like everything's centered perfect. So I am actually going to use the pump assembly to be a guide. The 1/4-inch holes, the 1/4-inch drill bit fits perfectly into these 1/4-inch holes, and it's a steel basket, so really what's the harm that you're going to cause by doing this? Next, install the threaded insert. You have to snap it into place. Now for the trim ring, you may have to grind a little bit off inside of these grooves to get them to fit perfectly. I wish that they would have gotten this right the first time. This is kind of a bummer, but the way that it works is the ring kind of snaps into place, and you're needing to thread these fasteners into this plate. This plate is threaded. So you need it to fit, and you need it to line up with the top of the pump, the basket. So when you go to install this thing, it gets pulled apart ever so slightly by these inserts. They have little tabs or little plastic domes on the underside, which is what the threaded inserts go into. And I have to assume that they've found that there's just inconsistencies between the casting process and cutting of these plates that just doesn't guarantee a perfect fit. it's kind of a bummer. But what you got to do is grab a grinder, and you need to open up some of these half moons. So what I'm going to do is focus on the ones that I know are pulling it open, and I'm going to start with these ones that are farthest apart, directly in the center. Okay, after a bunch of grinding, I got them to line up enough that the fasteners will thread into it with the pump top on it to test fitment. So that works. Wish we didn't have to do that, but give yourself a solid half an hour of grinding. One thing I learned is that you're going to want to use the drum style grinding discs. I did start by using a flap wheel, but it is just too hard to get inside of that little circle to grind consistently. So what you end up with is like kind of chewing into it. It's not a nice smooth curve. Whereas if you take a drum, toss this in a die grinder or a drill end with a drum rounded grinding disc, sanding disc, and this worked super good, and it maintained a consistent shape to it, so it was nice and smooth. Okay, so it's fitted in there now, so that's awesome. It's time to start working on the pump assembly. So these are built to be trimmed to length, so they are universal. So it's another situation where you're going to have to make some modifications. So use whatever tools you have. You can use a hacksaw, you can use an angle grinder, you could maybe get away with using a Sawzall, though that's probably going to be the uglier of the options. It's probably going to chew it up a little bit, but it'll probably work. It just has to get cut. So in order to measure for the depth, there's a few things to consider. So the way that this attaches is your tray sits inside of this C-channel, and your tray here should be as low as possible in the tank. So what you'll do, you've got ribs on the bottom of it as well, so you'll have to keep those in mind. And what I'm going to do is find the tallest of the ribs that's directly below it. Keep in mind that this tray does stick out, so you do have ribs that are sometimes in other spots. You want to see if those are going to be taller than the one you're measuring from, so you'll keep that in mind. So what I like to use is a solid 1 foot ruler. Tape measures work fine, but if you've ever done woodworking, you know that the end of the tape measure has a little bit of give to it. So for the sake of measuring this, I like to use something solid. So what I'm getting in the shoebox tank is approximately about 8 inches of depth here. Yeah, about 8 inches. I'd say it's closer to 7 7/8. So we'll go over here to our assembly, and we'll first mark the exact depth. So I'm going to mark it right at 7 7/8. Great. And now what I'm going to do, because I don't want it rubbing against it, is I'm going to cut just above that line, just the tiniest amount, about a 1/16 of an inch above that. and actually cutting it there, it looks like with the basket, one of the lowest points that it can possibly go is using this slot here. It's basically at the very end of it. So more than likely, by cutting right there, or you can even cut just flush with the top of that groove, or really anything above it. We'll put it this way. For the shoebox, you can most likely, with the poly tank, and measure yours too just to make sure, but you can probably cut anywhere between these two openings, these two slots, because you bolt this thing up. It's got a hole in the bottom of it, and you're gonna bolt that onto this bracket anyways. So you kind of got that area you can just cut from. That'll be fine. Okay. All right, now we're going to test fit this. Is this supposed to fit? Okay guys, so now that we've got the pump and the sock on here, we're going to talk about how we're going to install these fittings on the top of it. So what's really important is that you kind of plan out which way your pump and basket is going to be oriented. So in my case, I want to give myself as much space as absolutely possible for my fuel lines that are going to be running through here. So what I'm doing is I am going to point this tray toward the back side of the gas tank, which really whenever your vehicle's under load, there's a chance it's going to be leaning back a little bit anyways. It's going to be bulldogging. And that way you're guaranteeing that fuel is going to be in the tray. But also, this is going to provide me with the most space between my return and my output for fittings and stuff like that. So we're going to have to attach fittings onto this thing. In my case, I'm using AN lines. But this is going to give me the most room to work with, whereas if we flipped it around the other way, you actually have like less room. These are closer to the channel. So we don't know exactly how everything's going to fit in the channel, so we're just going to try it this way first. Make sure that this assembly is fully tightened down. Yep. There we go. So, slip some Teflon tape on there. Make sure that the tail of your Teflon tape is pointing the direction so that it's, when you're twisting this in, the tail isn't getting unraveled by threading it in. This is kind of a common mistake for people. Also, don't have a ton of excess at the top of it, because you don't want that falling in and getting pulled into the sock. Okay. Okay. We'll get those fully twisted in here in a moment. First, we're going to test fit again. Okay, so next we're going to actually install the pump into the basket. The way that it's going to rest, you have to have your sock pointing out opposite of the output. So output goes in the back side of the pump, sock goes this direction, and it's going to rest in there just like that. Next, what you're going to do is you'll need to measure. Now what's kind of nice is the sock doesn't let you go too far back, so you're not going to rub on that screw that's behind. But what you got to measure is your fuel line here. Get that cut to length. Cut it, test it again. Yep, in my case it's a little long, tiny bit too long. Okay. Got to get your fuel hose clamps on here. Get those ready. Put them in a orientation so you can actually access them. And then slip your fuel hose on. Put a little bead of oil on it to lubricate. Okay, I'm going to start by sliding this on. It's easier to start with the pump side. Get your clamps on how you want them. There we go. You can allow your pump to rest right on the bottom. Grab your 1/4 inch drive, snug her down. Last step is the nylon return tube. Trim that so it's approximately 1 inch off of the bottom of the tray. Okay, so to install the nylon tube, you've got to warm it up. You can either use a heat gun or you could use a lighter or a torch. You just got to be super careful if you've got flame you're using. Heat gun works better. Next is installing your wiring. These little silver bolt down pieces that are on the top are actually sealed. They're like sealed fittings, so slide on your connector for your fuel pump. Clamp it down, and then make sure your wires are ran nicely. And then these will get snugged down, and that will seal up the wires. Now it's time to install, so let's coat this in a gasket sealant. Okay, so our last step before we are actually able to fit the gas tank and kind of mock up and start putting in some lines is for us to do our fuel sending unit. This is a fuel level sending unit, I should say. And it's a pretty simple one. This is another one from Tanks Incorporated, and what this does is it's fully adjustable. You can see how it's got the wire wrapped around it that has extra slack in it, so depending on your length, you'll uncoil it. And it's a very simple piece in that you've got a float on one end, and that attaches to a rod here in the center, or rather attaches to the mount in the center of it, and that's just on a rheostat. So all it is it's a rheostat that's adjusted by the float moving it up and down, and that's what sends the varying ground signal up to your gauge, your indicator. So super simple, and the installation is pretty straightforward as well. So in our case, we're just like dropping it in there at its current height. You can see that it doesn't fit all the way. Hopefully you can see. So we don't need the extra adjustment piece, which they're stacked here. So what we're going to do for the shoebox gas tank is we're going to undo the fasteners, take off the rheostat, and then we're going to take off this extra adjusting piece on here, and then only use the piece that attaches to the top. So it's very straightforward. Disassemble, reassemble with only one of the adjusting legs, basically. We'll work from taking the nuts off. It's not twisting nice. Oh, okay, so it's threaded. So take your nuts off first. Giggity. And these can be discarded. See, now there's the two pieces. Remove the rheostat. Hang on to these fasteners. Okay, never mind, don't do that. Jake, edit this part out. Okay, now what you're going to do is take these fasteners out. Slide out the bracket. Slide on the other one. Okay guys, so now we've got it roughed, kind of a rough installation, or roughly adjusted. Now we're going to measure the tank depth. Take your ruler, measure again. I'm getting right here about 8.5 or so. Yeah, roughly 8.5 inches. So what we're going to do is we're going to set this height to this center piece right here. So I got 8.5, so I'm going to set it at 4¼ inches. Now how that's going to work is we're going to have to loosen these guys. And your height is from the bottom of this plate. Maybe I'll loosen a little more. There we go. And so we're looking for 4¼ inches. So we're going to go from there, and then we want to center it on this piece in the center here, kind of like the adjuster on the rheostat. So we want to set that at 4¼ inches. Perfect. So now I'm going to set the float height. So grab your flathead screwdriver, and this has a little float, like it already has a little rod in it, and we're going to remove that rod. I think the reason the rod is there in the first place is so that you can loosen up your set screw. Now, we're going to have the float coming off the side here. And what they want you to do is they want you to set your float arm, and it looks like the top of the float itself, to be approximately 1/8 inch off of the height. Just snug this down a tiny bit here. So they want it about 1/8 inch below the bottom of this plate. And we're relatively close. So what you're going to want to do is, especially if you've got something that's already 1/8 inch, it's really helpful for you to just press that up against it, and then you can basically just slide this right up to it. Now I don't think I've got anything that's going to fit that need. I don't believe I've got any 1/8 inch plate left, but what I am going to do is I'm going to hold my ruler up, and I'm just going to adjust this. Don't be afraid to have a little bit of tension with your set screw so it doesn't slip and slide on you too easy. Set it up to its top height. Get yourself about 1/8 inch. One final snug down. And then what you're going to do is cut off the excess of this arm. Okay, so now that the assembly is built, we've got a little bit of like fine tuning now, the last little trimming pieces to do. So the reason why you need to trim off the bottom of this thing is because you have to get this whole assembly to slide in. So that means you're sticking the bulb in and you're having to kind of come at a little bit of an angle to put it in there. And if this lower bracket, or the bracket that's attached to, is too long and you're coming in at a little bit of an angle, you can see how this is going to keep you from being able to slide it through this very small hole. So you've got to trim that off at the sort of at the length of this, or at the base of the rheostat housing. And then the arm for your bulb needs to be precise as well, because that also affects your overall width. This rheostat housing is basically the size of the hole for the gas tank, so you really got to get this right. So I'm going to trim this one more time, and then I'm actually going to pop the rheostat housing off as well and cut this off, because it's a better idea to do it that way. That way you're not risking putting like metal shards from grinding this off, or using a cutoff wheel or a hacksaw, whatever. You're guaranteeing you're keeping crap out of the rheostat. There we go. All right, time to install. Well, no, actually we want to figure out our gasket. All right, well, I guess I'm not losing my mind. I thought I was for a second there. I don't appear to have a gasket or fasteners for this thing. I don't know if it was supposed to be included in the kit and they just forgot to throw it in there or what, but so what I'm going to have to do is use the gasket maker. Now, this is a machined surface here, so it isn't rough like the rest of the gas tank is. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the gasket, the sealant, to seal this area. And I happen to have a couple of 1032s machine screw, so we're good. I can put it back together that way. A little frustrating, but I mean, a lot of people assemble gas tanks with these sealants anyways, so it's not the end of the world. Both surfaces are machined, so this should work just fine. So last step is to just install it. So I'm going to go ahead and grab some gasket maker and put her together. Alright, so your last step, now that you've got it all back together. Oh, and one other thing to think about if you run into this situation like I had to, where you gotta use gasket sealer. Fuel will make its way through the threads of the screws, so out through the head. That's why the other ones have O-rings on them. Make sure that you have gasket sealant that goes on the inside as well, meaning the inside of where the fasteners go. So you want to try and seal it completely around the fasteners, and then obviously the outer ring. So anyway, last step, the signal comes up the center piece here, and the body is the main grounded portion. So your signal wire attaches to the center lug. That's where that wire comes up through from the rheostat to it. So you ground this side. And mine going that direction. And I'm doing this now because you want to get as much stuff figured out on the top side of this thing first, unless you already have like an access hole in your back seat. I haven't decided what I'm going to do, if I'm going to put one in or not. It would certainly be nice. I'd hate to have to drop the tank every time, but we'll see. So anyways, there we go, guys. Hopefully this is helpful. This is a little bit longer video, but it's a lot of information to cover. You're setting up a gas tank with full modern components for EFI, 12 volt, 6 volt, whatever sending unit. It'll handle all of it, and everything's brand new. So thanks for tuning in, guys, and we will see you guys on the next video.